can adjust it. Okay, we'd like to welcome anybody that shows up on the internet, whether we're going to be able to. Okay, so it's still broadcasting. We have Lori from Toronto and whoever this is. So we have a couple of people on here.
Hi, Lori.
Okay, so let me do an introduction here. Steve Boucher is joining us from St. Catharines, Ontario. I knew about this story for a couple of years. I'm doing a book on aliens and the connection to music, rock music. I knew about this story and happened to be in Bradford, Ontario. And Steve, who we have here tonight, stood up and told the story, and I immediately recognized the story as the one that I'd been looking for a long time. So, yeah. Okay, so Steve, welcome, and maybe sort of tell us a little bit about who you are and how this whole thing started.
Okay, well, my name is Steve Boucher, and I'm from St. Catharines, Ontario. And how it all started was I started getting flashes of memory of something that didn't really make any sense to me. It seemed to involve extraterrestrial beings, and so I've been interested in the subject for a number of years. And I bought Bud Hopkins' book, Missing Time. And after I read that book, it had triggered some memories in me. And one of the fragments of memory that I had involved my dad. And so I asked my dad if he remembered this incident. I described it a little bit to him, and he did remember it. And so we were both surprised because he thought it was a dream, and I thought maybe it was a dream as well. But when we both remembered it, that seemed pretty strange to me. So at the end of Bud Hopkins' book, he had a little paragraph there that said, if you feel that you may have had an incident similar to the ones described in this book, to please write to me, and if you want to research it, I'll put you in touch with a researcher in your area that can help you. So I wrote to him, and I wasn't really expecting much, but a couple of weeks later, he phoned my parents' house, got my mother on the phone, and he asked her if I would be able to come to New York City. He had a studio in Manhattan where he does his artwork. And so anyway, she put me on the phone, and I was really surprised that he actually called me from New York. And so he asked if I had any holiday time coming up, and I said, yeah, I have a week of holidays coming up, and I was going to go up north, but I can change my plan and come to New York. And so he said, okay. So he arranged for me to take this thing called the Sky Bus, and it's generally for businessmen. It's a small jet that businessmen use, and the rate is cheaper than going for a regular flight. So I took the Sky Bus, and his friend Ted Boucher met me at the airport and took me to Bud's studio. And so he had arranged for me to have 3 hypnosis sessions originally with Dr. Aphrodite Clamar that did the sessions in his book. And so I went to her for 2 of those sessions, and Bud ended up doing the 3rd one himself. And then he sent me to a behavioral therapist in Manhattan as well, which her job was to determine that I wasn't crazy or that I wasn't trying to do it for attention or something like that, you know. And so she gave me a number of tests and had a long conversation with me. And she gave me the Rorschach test, which is like the ink blots, you know, and she gave me an IQ test, and she gave me another test on history, which I felt was kind of a little bit unfair because it was about American history, and I'm a Canadian, so but it turned out that I knew more about American history than I did about the Canadian history, and I was able to name a number of American presidents, and that was part of what the test was about. And so I guess I passed all the tests okay. And so anyway, I had the 2 sessions with Dr. Clamar and 1 session with Bud, which revealed a wealth of information. Apparently, I found out that I was what they'd call a repeater case. And I'd had a number of abductions or visitations since I was a very small child. And I even uncovered some memories of a scenario before I was born that involved a gray entity. Yeah, that I remembered being on a high place, like it looked like a mountain or a cliff of some sort, and this being was standing next to me, and I knew him fairly well. Like, I had a kind of respect for him like you would have for a police officer or a military officer. He had some kind of official capacity, and I believe his name was Rigel, and he was telling me that I had to go down to Earth, and we were standing on this high place looking out into the sky, and I could see the Earth hanging there like a big beach ball. And so anyway, I was arguing with him because I didn't want to go down there. And he said, "Why don't you want to go down there?" And I said, "Well, because I've heard so many horrible things about Earth that I'm afraid to go." And so he continued to try to persuade me to go. And I said, what would happen if I refused? And he said, "Well, if you refuse, there's a lot worse places they could send you than Earth." And so I took that as a threat, direct threat, you know. And I felt like my free will was being violated because he was basically telling me that I had to go. I had no choice. He said, "It's been decreed by those higher up." And so anyway, I continued to beg him not to send me down there. And he said, "Well," he says, there's a fella that just came back from there, and maybe if you talk to him, it might alleviate some of your fears." So I agreed to do this, and so I found myself suddenly in a white room with no windows, and it was very dimly lit in there, and I saw this guy sitting in a chair in the middle of the floor, and he was kind of hunched over, and he didn't look very happy. So I went up to him and I said, "I understand you're from Earth, or you were just you just came from Earth." And he said, "Yes." And I said, "What was it like down there?" I said, "Is it as bad as I've heard?" And he said, "Well, it's good and it's bad." And so I said, "Well, is it more good than bad or more bad than good?" And he said, "Well, it's a bit of both." And so I said, would you go back if you had the opportunity? And he says, well, I'm really not the right person to be asking this. And I said, why not? And he said, well, I have to go back. And I said, why? And he said, because I didn't complete my mission. And when he said that, I realized that he had terminated his life before he completed his mission. And he committed suicide. So I backed away from him, and I considered myself done there, and then I suddenly appeared back next to this being again on the high place. And we were just staring out at the earth hanging there in space. And he said, did he alleviate your fears at all? And I said, well, not really. In fact, he just made me feel worse. And so anyway, he said, well, you have to go. And so I said, well, if I go down there, will you come and check on me every now and then and make sure I'm okay? And he said, yes, I'll do that. And what I didn't realize was that when I asked him that and he agreed, I had entered into a soul contract. And so he kept his word, and he came and visited me from time to time. And he was kind of the lead character in the Abductions. I hear a dog out there. On the computer. Oh. Oh, okay. Okay, so anyway, I asked the being how long I'd have to be down there, and he said, not long. He said maybe 60, 65 years. And when he said that, I said, 65 years? I said, I can't go down there that long. I can't be there that long. And he said, well, it's really not that long, you know. And so anyway, I finally ended up agreeing to go. And so he said that there's something that I'm going to tell you that may help you if you go down there. And he says, find the people who carry the teachings of a man named Jesus. And he said, if you can find those people and learn those teachings, when you come back here, you'll go to a far better place than you've ever been before, than you could ever imagine. And so I said, okay, I'll find this Jesus. And he said, no, you won't find him because he's not there anymore, but find the people who carry his teachings. And if you can learn those teachings when you come back here, you'll go to a place that's far better than you could ever dream of. So what he meant by that is up for debate. I know that when I did come down here, at a certain time in my life, I went through a bout of Christianity, and I found that a lot of the questions I had, they couldn't answer. A lot of the information that I needed to know about UFOs, they couldn't help me with. They basically demonized the whole phenomenon. And but there are other ways of learning the teachings of Jesus. There's the Essenes. They carried a certain number of his teachings. In the Nag Hammadi library, there's all kinds of Gnostic information about the teachings of Jesus. So it may not necessarily have been Christianity that he was talking about. So anyway, I agreed to come down here, and so I came through some sort of a portal or a tunnel, and then I was in a human body here on Earth, like a baby's body. And for the longest time, I remembered that conversation I had with this being, Rigel. And later on, when I became a Christian, for a while there, I found this passage in the Bible that where the devil took Jesus up to a high place and showed him all the kingdoms of the earth and said, if you do an act of worship to me, I'll give this all to you. And when I read that, I thought of this high place. And by the size of the earth in space, from the perspective that I saw it from, I tend to think that it was someplace on the moon, maybe on the edge of a crater on the moon or something. But anyway, it's just food for thought there.
Let's go, for the sake of the audience that's on the internet, let's skip to the 1971, and we'll come back later and cover your early life. But let's go to 1971 so they can hear the main part of the story. What happens there?
Okay. I was probably about 16 or 17, something like that. And I was in a band. I played woodwinds, mostly recorders and wooden recorders. And I had a tenor, an alto, a soprano, and I was also the lead singer for a while. And so anyway, there were 3 other people in the band. There was a guitarist that I'll call Tom, a bass player that I'll call him Calvin, and a drummer that I'll call Sam. And the pseudonym that I was given by Q-Forn was Jack T. And if you can find the article in an issue of Flying Saucer Review. It's published on the internet. And anyway, we were coming home from a party that we'd played a gig earlier in Niagara-on-the-Lake at a hotel. And after the gig, we were still all wide awake. And so our drummer, Sam, said he got invited to go to this party, and he said they asked me if I'd bring the band and maybe play a little bit. And he said, are you guys up for that, or are you too tired? And so we all agreed that, yeah, okay, we could go and play one set maybe. And it was in the winter time, sometime around near Christmas, because I remember there being a Christmas tree at the party. And so we went there, and we set up our equipment in the living room, and I noticed that there was a pole lamp in the corner, and it was like a spring-loaded pole lamp that pressed against the ceiling to hold it in place. And we took it down so we could get the drums in there, and so we played a set, and then we decided we were going to leave. And I saw this little bottle of cream de menthe sitting there, and I pinched it and put it in the bass drum. And so we left, we were leaving the party and loading up the van. And all of a sudden this guy came up to us that nobody knew. He was there at the party and kind of had long hair, and he was around the same age as us. And he said, are you guys going to St. Catharines? And we said, yes. And he said, well, you mind if I hitch a ride with you? And so I said, well, you have to talk to the guitarist because he's driving. So he asked the guitarist, Tom, and he said, yes, we can take you to St. Catharines. So he got in the back of the van. And so there were 6 of us, actually, because there were the 4 members of the band, and then there was Anne Marie, which was, at the time, was the drummer's girlfriend, and then there was this guy that we were giving a ride to. So we were coming back from the party. The party was in Vineland, I believe, and we went to get on the Queenie, and the entrance was closed. So we decided to take the North Service Road down to the next junction and get on the Queenie there. And so we started heading down the service road, and the next junction was in Jordan. And so we're driving along, and I'm sitting on the floor with Anne Marie and Calvin and this stranger, and Tom, the guitarist, is driving, and Sam, the drummer, is sitting in the passenger seat. And so all of a sudden, along the road, Tom stops the van. And we said, why are you stopping? And he said, well, you better take a look over the seat here, because you're not going to believe what if I tell you. So we looked over the seat, and ahead of us, around this restaurant that it's had a number of different names: Admiral Bird's, Plain and Fancy. I'm not really sure what it's called now, but it was closed. And in the parking lot, sort of across the service road, was this large saucer-shaped craft. And it was sitting on the ground, and there was lights from the bottom of it, like little searchlights panning back and forth over the pavement. And it had portholes all around the extreme part of the perimeter, and they appeared to be like recessed portholes. So anyway, we were a fair distance away from this thing, and Tom said, what do you think it is? And so I came up with a suggestion, well, maybe it's a movie prop, and maybe they're filming a movie or something. And so he said, well, why would it be all lit up like that in the middle of the night if it was a movie prop? And we all kept staring at this thing, and finally we agreed that we'd turn around and go back the other way, and maybe get the exit further down the other way and get onto the Queenie that way. So we were going to do that, and then we started moving towards thing instead of turning around. And I said to Tom, why aren't you turning around? And he said, well, I am. He said, look. And he's hauling the steering wheel around to the left to try to turn around, and nothing's happening. And we just keep moving toward this thing. So we're yelling, like, put on the brake. And he says, I am putting on the brake. And he's stamping on the brake, and nothing's happening. And we couldn't feel any of the surface bumps in the road or anything like that. It was like a smooth movement towards this thing. And we were moving toward it pretty quick. Like, we sped up, and we were moving toward it really fast. And so it was so scary that I was actually bracing for impact, because I thought we might hit this thing. But instead we got up to about maybe 15, 20 feet away from it, and then we came to rest on the road, and the engine wouldn't start, couldn't do anything, just sit there. And so we were all kind of panicking at the time, and so Sam, the drummer, came up with a suggestion. He said, maybe if we all be really quiet and stay down, they'll leave us alone. you know. So we decided to do that, be really quiet and just stay down. And so I could hear Tom and Sam in the front seat whispering. And Tom said, "Oh no." And I said, "What's going on?" And then Sam said, "They're coming out." And I said, "What do they look like?" And he said, they're just little guys. And so they came over to the van, and we could hear them trying the doors, and we had the doors all locked, and we were just trying to remain really still and stay low. And at one point, I saw the side of one of the beings' head go by the window. And it surprised me, and I said, "Did you see that?" And everybody went, "Shh, shh," you know. And so I said, "Yeah, but did you see that?" And Anne-Marie said, "Yes, I saw it." So then it came around, we felt that they were behind the van, like at the back of the van. And we're all sitting there, and I was thinking that if we may end up in a skirmish with these beings, and I didn't know what they were, so I started looking around for a weapon. And I grabbed the mic stand that was beside me, and I was ready to hit them with it if they got in. And then a strange thing happened at that point. The guy that we had picked up at the party that none of us knew, he was sitting in the back corner, and he just suddenly reached over and opened the door. He opened the back door, and it flung open, and there was, I could see 3 beings standing there, and they were grazed, and I was panicking, and I grabbed the mic stand, and the one being came up into the van. I don't know if he climbed up or if he levitated or how he got in, but he came in through the back door, and he was standing there in the van, and we couldn't move. We were paralyzed. And then I heard him speaking to me in my head. I could hear him saying, "We're sorry that we had to paralyze you because you were thinking thoughts of violence." And he said, "I was concerned for my safety and the safety of my crew members." And so he said, "We're going to do some tests on some of you." And he says, after the tests, we'll bring you back and you can go on your way. But we need to bore you for a little while to do these tests. And he said, "So I'm going to select 3 volunteers." like we're going to volunteer, you know. So anyway, he said, "I'm going to select 3 of you." And so I heard him look at somebody and said, "You," and then he looked at the bass player, and he said, "And you," and then he turned around and he looked at me. And when he looked at me, I looked down at the ground because I didn't want to look at his eyes, because that's how they communicate. I could hear, when I looked at his eyes, I could hear him, and when I looked away, I couldn't hear him very well. So anyway, I was just staring at the ground, and then it was getting really uncomfortable. And so all of a sudden I looked up at him, and as soon as my eyes met his, he said, "And you." And so anyway, then he said, "Would you follow me, please?" And he turned around and he started to leave the van, and on his way out, his foot caught in the drum, the snare drum stand, and he knocked the snare drum over, and it rolled out the back of the van onto the ground. And immediately one of the beings picked it up. And so when I got out, this being held it out to me, and he said, "Is this yours?" And I said, "No." I said, and he said, "Who does it belong to?" And I pointed to the drummer, Sam, and he gave me the dirtiest look. "Why did you point to me?" So anyway, the leader which this time I think it was Rigel. He said to one of the beings, he said, "Go and get him out." So this being went over to Sam's door, and he got him out somehow, and he came around the back of the van with the being, and they handed him the drum and said, "Is this yours?" And he said, "Yes." And he said, "Is it damaged?" And he looked at it quickly and he said, "No, it's not damaged, it's okay." And he took it from the being and put it in the back of the van. And then I was standing there and I was looking at this one being, and I was looking right into his face. He was like, standing right in front of me. We were like about 2 feet apart. And I was thinking to myself, "Man, are you ever ugly?" And then he started to look away, like he felt embarrassed. And then all of a sudden it occurred to me, did I think that about him, or did he think that about me? Because it was like our minds were connected, and that statement came out, but I wasn't sure if it was his thought or my thought. But anyway, so the leader called us all over, and at this point Sam became one of us too, came along with us. And he brought us to the side of the van and lined us up in a line. And he said, "We're going on to the ship now." And he said, "We're using a different method of transportation than what you're used to." And he said, "What I want you to do is face the back of the person in front of you." And he said, "I'll be in the front. One of my crew will be in the back." And he said, "We're all going to move together as a unit." And he said, "When we do this," he says, "don't look to the left or the right. Just look straight ahead at the person in front of you." And he said, "And when we go onto the ship, don't touch the hull." And so I wasn't very obedient. And as soon as we started to move, I felt us lift off the ground, and we all started moving together as one unit. And I could see the back of the being's head that was leading the group. And I just turned my head to the left for a second, and immediately we stopped. When I faced straight ahead, we started going again. And I said, "Oh, is that how it works?" And so then I looked to the right, we stopped again, and they were very patient. They just waited until I looked forward again. And then when I looked forward, we started moving again. So once I'd satisfied my curiosity, I just went along with it after that. And we came around to these corrugated steps, metal steps. And I thought we were going to walk up the steps, but instead we just went up straight as a unit. And the drummer, Sam, was standing right in front of me, and I was looking at the back of his head. And when we went in, he banged his head on the top of the doorway. He was fairly tall, and their doorways are made for them, not for us, And so anyway, he complained about it. But once we got inside, we started going in, and then I looked down at the hull, and just for a second, I very lightly touched it with my ring finger of my left hand, just to see what it felt like as we were going in. And it felt warm. It felt like aluminum or something like that, And then I found out that a couple of weeks later, I ended up with the biggest darn planter's wart on that finger that I've ever had in my life. It was huge, and it took a long time to get rid of it, So anyway, once we got inside the craft, they immediately separated us, and there was one being for each person. And they were telling us that they wanted us to go, and there were some benches there that sort of followed the contour of the ship. And they wanted us to go and sit down there and remove our clothing for these tests. And they said, just pile your clothing in the corner beside the bench. You'll be able to see it. Nobody's going to touch it. And I had my bag of recorders with me as well, because where I go, my recorders go with me, And so I didn't want to leave them in the van. I brought them with me. And so I put them down on top of my clothing, and we were getting undressed, and somebody there had long underwear. I remember that. And so anyway, they took me and they asked me to get on top of this gurney. It looked like a gurney. It was a metal bed or cot, and it had a mattress on it and a pillow kind of arrangement. And they wheeled me over to this one area, and they asked me to just wait there for a minute. And they went and got some equipment, and the beings were communicating with each other. And when they weren't looking at me, I was thinking to myself, I need to get something from the ship, some kind of an artifact or something, because nobody's going to believe this. And so I noticed that I was right next to this countertop unit that kind of followed the contour of the ship. And it had drawers in it, and there were little knobs on the drawers. So I reached over and I grabbed one of the knobs and I started to unscrew it. And I took it off, and I thought, well, now what am I going to do with this thing? I don't have any pockets, And I was wondering where I was going to hide it, And so anyway, I just kept it in my hand for the time being. And so then the beings... they had another little metal tray thing with some instruments on it. And then the leader came over to me and he said, okay, he said, we're ready to do the test. And then all of a sudden he said, what have you got? And I said, what do you mean? He said, you took something. And he could see that in my mind. And so I knew that I'd been caught. So I opened my hand and I showed him the little knob from the drawer. And he said, you can't keep that. And one of the other beings came over to him and said, why not let him keep it? What's it going to hurt? And he looked at the being and he said, no. He says, we're not supposed to let them keep anything. So he took it off me. And then he wheeled me over to this part of the ship that was closer to the center of it. And he picked up this instrument off the tray that looked a bit to me like the handpiece of a contemporary phone. And he brought it over and he said, I'm going to show you how this instrument works. He turned it on and he held it over his arm, and the light from it was a green light that lit up his arm, and everywhere that this green light fell on his arm, I could see his skeletal structure underneath his skin. So it was some kind of an X-ray device or something. And so then he said, now I'm going to try it on you. And I said, does it hurt? He said, no, it doesn't hurt at all. He said, you might feel a little bit of a tingling. So he said, hold out your arm. And I held out my arm, and he took this thing and he shone it on my arm. But the strange thing about it is that when he shone it on my arm, I could not only see the skeleton bones underneath, but I could see the muscle tissue, and I could see the veins and the arteries, and I could see them pulsing with the beat of my heart, and I could see everything. And I wondered why I couldn't see all that stuff when he put it on his arm. But anyway, he said, now, he says, we're going to use it to take a look inside your stomach. And he said, I need you to lay down. And so I laid down, and there was at least 2, maybe 3 beings were crowded around me, and they were shining this thing on my stomach, and it's like they were looking for something. And so anyway, when they finished, the leader told me, he said, sit up a bit, and he raised up the back of this gurney thing, and he showed me this thing on the wall that was like a hypnodisc. That's the only way I can describe it. It was like a helix on this disc, and it started spinning, and when it spun, it would draw you into the center of it, and I was looking at this thing, and it bothered me, and I said, I don't want to look at that. And he said, no, it's important. He said, keep looking at it. And I tried a couple of times not to look at it, but he said, no, keep looking at it. It's very important. So I kept looking at this thing, and then all of a sudden I just blacked out. And when I awoke, they'd done something to me. I don't know what it was, but they were rolling up the instruments in a cloth. And he said, we're going to take you back so you can put your clothes back on again. And all this time, the drummer, Sam, had been arguing with this one being, He's the guy that banged his head going in. And the being was trying to convince him to get his clothes off, and he said, no way, you're not going to make me do that. And he stood up, he stood his ground, and after a while, the being finally gave up, and he actually patted him on the back, and he said, I respect your decision. And so the rest of us went along with it. And so we were putting our clothes back on after, and they came over and they said, well, now if you want to ask us any questions, now is the time to do it. So a couple of the guys asked, typical questions like, where are you from? And they showed us a map on the wall, and they said, do you know the stars at all? And I said, well, not really. And they said, well, then it probably wouldn't do you any good for us to tell you where we came from. But he said, it's up in this area, and he pointed to some area on the map. And then somebody asked, do you have any bases on Earth? And he said, yes, as a matter of fact, there's one right out here. And he pointed to Lake Ontario. And so then it came around to my turn, and I'd been thinking to myself, what am I going to ask them? And I came up with a really good question. I said, what is the true religion on Earth? And it kind of took them aback, like they didn't expect that. And they sort of glanced at each other, and then they looked at me and they said, why would you ask a question like that? And I said, well, because you guys are obviously more advanced than we are technologically, and you're probably more advanced socially and spiritually as well. And so I figured if anybody would know what the true religion on Earth is, it would be you. And so he just kind of stared at me for a minute, and then he said, there is no true religion on Earth. And he said, and that's the end of the questions. And I said, well, wait a minute, like, you can't just leave me hanging like that. Why is there no true religion on Earth? And he says, I'm sorry, but I'm afraid we've told you too much already. And so that was the end of the questions. It wouldn't take any more. And so we all lined up and started leaving the ship. And I was the last one to leave, and he put his hand on my shoulder and he said, wait a minute. And so everybody left, and they all went back to the van, and I stayed behind. And So I don't know what happened at that point, but it was like he still had some control over me in hypnosis. And the next thing I remembered, I was standing in the parking lot looking up at him in the doorway of the ship. And he was kind of silhouetted in the doorway because the light was coming from behind him. But I could see these big black eyes staring at me. And I felt like he had given me some sort of a mission or something. And the last thing I remember him saying is that I would be a big help to my friends and my family in the future. And I couldn't remember anything else that he told me, but then he said, my face was itching, and I went to scratch my face, and I found it was all wet, like I'd been crying, and I didn't know what I'd been crying about. I was surprised, you know. So he said to me, he said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Now, wasn't there something you wanted to show me?" And I started thinking, and I thought, oh yeah, I've got my recorders here. I wanted to show him the recorders. And so I took the big one out and assembled it and handed it to him, and he took a look at it. He was kind of looking at it and turning it around, and then I took one of the small ones out, my soprano recorder, and I showed him how to play it. I played a little bit, and then I handed it to him. And when he took it from my hand, I held a little resistance to see if I could feel him pulling it out of my hand. And I did. I felt him pulling it out of my hand. I did that because I wasn't sure if he was a spirit or at the time. And so anyway, after I showed him how I played it, he took it and he did something really strange with it. He held it up to his nose instead of his mouth. And he blew into it, and he got a couple of notes out of it. And I was really surprised. That I wondered, why would he put it up to his nose? And I got my answer several years later when I read a report of an alien autopsy done by Leonard Stringfield. And in the report, it said that their mouth is only a pocket. It only goes back so far. It doesn't go down the throat. It just goes like a little pocket. And they have one organ that does the job of the heart and the lungs together. And I guess the way the oxygen comes in is through the nose, and so they don't have the ability to blow out through their mouth. So anyway, I asked him if he'd like to keep that little recorder as a souvenir. And so he said to me, "What's a souvenir?" And I said, "Oh, it's something to remember me by." And he said, "Yes, that would be fine." And so he took it. And then I started thinking to myself, I hope I can find another one of those. Because I like that particular brand. And so all of a sudden he says, "Would you like it back?" And and I said, no, I forgot that he was reading my mind. I said, "No, you keep it. I want you to have it." He said, "You're sure?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Okay." And he said, "Would you like me to take you back to your vehicle?" And I said, "No, that's okay. I'll walk back. I'm okay." And I said, "Am I going to see you again?" And he said, "Yes." He said, "You will." But there was a part that I missed where I saw him silhouetted in the doorway of the ship, and I felt this tremendous love coming from him, like really strong love. It was, I've never felt a love like that before. And in retrospect, I find that kind of strange coming from a gray, because a lot of people say that they have no emotions, but yet I felt this very strong from it. So when I went back to the van, I got in through the back door with my bag of recorders, and everybody was sitting in there, and it was like they were all in a state of suspended animation or something. They were just sitting completely still. And as soon as I got in, they all came to life, and they started talking again. And Sam had made this agreement with Tom, and he says, we've got to be in agreement on this, that we're not going to tell anybody what happened to us. And I said, no. I said, people need to know about this. And he said, no. He says, we're not going to tell anybody about it. And he says, if you tell anybody, we'll just deny it, and you'll look like an idiot. And I was really upset because, something incredible had happened to us, and they didn't want to talk about it. They didn't want to discuss it. They didn't want to tell anybody, and I was really upset about it. So I never agreed to everybody else agreed but me. And so we sat there and we watched the ship lift off the ground, and it started heading out toward Lake Ontario, but it didn't zoom off really fast. It just kind of coasted slowly. And we watched it, it was like a bright light, and it was getting smaller and smaller as it got further away. And on the way home, when we left, we went home, and I don't remember the stranger being in the van after that. So somewhere along the line, I think he disappeared, and suspect that he might have been planted on us specifically for the purpose of opening the door to give them access. So anyway, all the way home, I kept hearing in my head, "You're going to forget everything." And I was arguing with this voice in my head saying, no, I refuse to forget. I'm not going to forget. And I kept hearing this voice all the way home telling me I was going to forget. When I finally got home, I think it was somewhere around 4 a.m. I let myself in. My parents were asleep. And I went in the kitchen and I got a piece of paper and a pen, and I started writing down everything in point form that I could remember about the incident. And then I took that piece of paper, I put it in my dresser drawer, and I went to bed. And in the next morning, that paper was gone. And I never found it again until many years later. So that's my story, basically, but there's a lot more that happened to me as well.
It's exactly the way I remember you telling it, and next time you do an interview, do it the way you do now with up close. It's too bad we don't have the video. It really looks good with you up close. So you remember all this through regression, through Bud, right? And Bud was one of the premier people working on alien abductions in the 80s and 90s, right?
Well, it came out, I'm not sure if it was during the session I had with Bud or one of the ones with Aphrodite Clamar, but it was one of those sessions, and we recorded them on cassette at the time, and the cassettes mysteriously disappeared, but I discovered that I had transcribed 2 of the cassettes, and I wrote the story down, and And I forgot that I'd transcribed those cassettes, but I still have it in my own handwriting of the entire incident. And when I read it over, I found that I've got a lot more details now than I did when I wrote it down. It was just basic when I'd written it down, but since then, a lot more details have surfaced from my memory. You know, just little things like the drummer banging his head on the doorway going in and stuff like that, you know.
Okay, how many regressions have you had? You had some when you came back to Canada, right, in the recent years?
Yeah, Bud said he couldn't keep me any longer, and he said, if you want to continue researching this, he said, look for an organization called MUFON in St. Catharines, and get in touch with them, and they'll put you in touch with another hypnotic regressionist that can help you. And so when I came back, I went to a UFO symposium in Toronto. And while I was there, I saw J. Allen Hynek. I wish I had gone up and shook hands with him, but I never got to do that. But I saw him, and he was walking along with a couple of guys. And I also saw, I think William Moore was there too. And I went into a workshop there in one of the classrooms, and I told the experience I just told you about. And then I had to go. I couldn't stay because my parents had driven me up there, and they were my ride, and I was past the time I was supposed to meet them. So I made a quick exit after I told my story. But while I was there, I met these guys that I thought were members of MUFON, and they turned out to be from QFORN, the Canadian UFO Research Network, and they're no longer in existence anymore. They closed, I'm not sure when, but they listened to my story, and they wanted to continue the research with it, and they seemed like a legitimate organization, so I went along with it. And they took me to a lady in Toronto called Dr. Susan Shulman, who was a hypnotist, but she had never done anything like this before. She'd only done people who were quitting smoking or trying to lose weight, you know, that kind of thing. But it caught her interest when the guys started to talk to her, and they said, would you be willing to try it? And she said, okay. So she tried it, but she didn't really know what questions to ask me or, you know, how to proceed. So the one guy from QFORN, Harry Tokars, he asked her to, could she call Dr. Leo Sprinkle at the University of Wyoming, because he was an expert in hypnotic regression, especially with UFO cases. And so she called him right there, and we were all sitting in her office while she was talking to him on the phone, and he basically walked her through it over the phone, and she said, okay, thanks, and she hung up, and then we proceeded with the sessions. And I'm not sure exactly how many she did on me, but I think there was at least 4. And during the time when she was doing these sessions, at one point I started channeling an entity in one of the sessions. And so the guys from QFORN were asking this entity questions, and he was answering. And anyway, I couldn't tell you. I don't know. but because I don't even remember what was said all that well.
Oh.
And anyway, during the time that they were investigating my case, started having problems, like they had a whole string of bad luck was happening to all of them. A lot of things like losing money, large amounts of money. The hypnotist, Dr. Shulman, she went to Las Vegas with her boyfriend and lost a big amount of money gambling, and her and her boyfriend broke up, and she wouldn't answer any of Q-Forn's calls after that. They were trying to get through to her, and she wouldn't answer any of the calls. So, and we were hearing, they were hearing clicks on the phone, and the one guy's girlfriend, the phone rang, and she picked it up, and there was like a mechanical voice on the other end of it that said, "You and them have to stop what you're doing." And then it hung up, and she was just had the phone to her ear, and her mouth was hanging open, and Harry said, "What was it? What happened?" And she told him, and so I think we were having some Men in Black interference or something. I never actually saw any of these beings, but we had some, definitely there was something messing with the phones and causing chaos in their lives.
Wow. There's a question. We got a few questions here.
Yeah.
One of the questions is about the mission. Do you recall the mission, or what you are here to do? Because a lot of experiencers talk about the mission.
Yeah. I still don't know to this day exactly what the mission was. He gave me some kind of a mission. I know it really touched me because it had me crying, and I know it's something that I'm supposed to do in the future, but I don't know what it is.
Oh.
And
we talked about this in emails in the last couple of weeks about art. Do you think there's a connection between your artistic talents, because you are very artistic, and this incident, or do you think it's just part of your agreement coming into Earth that you have these skills of being able to draw very well?
Well, I read some of the cases that you posted, and it seems that a lot of them got these abilities after they had incidents with the beings. With me, they go back to when I was a very small child, so I can't make that claim. I've always been good in art and music.
What about psychic type stuff? Have you had anything that's weird since the incident, where, like, if you had the poltergeist type stuff, or the ability to see the future, or that kind of stuff that people report?
I found that my psychic abilities have increased recently. I don't know if it's because of the shift that we're going through or whatever, but I took a mediumship class, and I found that I was actually pretty good at it, and I was good at the psychic aspect of it as well. And I left the class. I went there for maybe a dozen weeks or so, once a week. And then I left the class because the medium that was teaching it suddenly came out with this, she said she had a new guide, and this guide was telling her that there's no such thing as reincarnation. And I found that really strange. Like, how can you be a medium and not believe in reincarnation? Like, that just doesn't make sense to me. So for me, that was a deal breaker. And so I left her class, but I'm going to be starting a new one, actually, on Monday evening. I'm starting a new class with another medium that I've known for a little while. I've met her several times at psychic fairs and things like that. And I've also taken a course in the tarot, so I can read tarot cards. And I've been getting more interested in this kind of stuff recently. I never really had much of an interest in it before, especially around the time when I was a Christian, because to them this is all demonic stuff, you know. And so I never bothered with it much then. But
Okay. Yeah. Why did you come forward in Brantford? Have you been telling the story, or did you have some sort of inspiration that you should sort of go public with your story? Because as we mentioned, this is like 20 years ago. Your story appeared in Flying Saucer Review, and I posted it in the discussion group of the meetup where this group here. It's in the discussion group. People can actually read the article. It was posted many years ago. I'm just wondering about why you came forward now and whether anything has changed in your life since you came forward.
yeah, well, back when this happened to me, I didn't want to reveal my real name, so I kept my identity private. Q-Forn gave me the pseudonym Jack T. So when you read the article, you'll know who I am anyway. But the reason I decided to come forward with it now is because there's so many things happening to the earth right now, so many changes, and with these different energies, and it seems like the old paradigm is falling apart and a new one is developing on a different level. And so I thought, if I'm ever going to go public with this story, now is the time to do it. Because I might not get another chance, you know, if there's a nuclear war or something, and you know, and I felt that this story needs to be told. And the incidents appear to have stopped around 1976, but I've been remembering a lot more over the years, more detail about them, and so I felt that the story needs to be retold again with this new information that I've been remembering. And there was one incident that hasn't been covered at all, and it's almost like a sequel to the incident I had with the band. And well, it's a bit of a long story. It's kind of like the incident with the van. It's about that long. But basically, in the incident with the band in the van, they abducted the band. In the second incident that we had, they abducted our audience. Basically what happened is we had a gig at Brock University, and we were supposed to play in the Brock pub. So we went there to play, and we ended up playing for an empty house. There was no audience there. I'm skipping a lot of parts, but we had an encounter with the beings when we got there, and they separated us. It seems to be a standard protocol for them to separate us, and so that there's only one for each person. And they discovered that we were there for a purpose because we were playing at the bar. And so they said, oh, well, they're going to miss them. So we have to let them go because they'll be missed. And so they let us go, and we went to play, but they told us we'd forget. We forgot about it almost immediately. we went into the bar and we set up our stuff and we played. And it was what was usually a very busy night. And this night, nobody had showed up at all. We were basically just playing for the staff. And they couldn't figure it out. They said, this is usually a really busy night. It's just packed with people. And there's nobody here. They said, this has never happened before. So after the gig, the guitarist, he gave me his keys and he said, can you go to the van and get my, he had this little dolly that he had wheels on it and you could pull it. And he was going to load all the equipment on the dolly to take it back to the van. So I said, okay. So I left and I went to get the dolly. When I went back into the university, I noticed that there was some sort of activity going on down the hallway. And so I walked down the hallway, and I was really surprised. I saw there must have been about 100 to 150 people or so all lined up along the lockers down the one hallway. And they were just standing there. So I went over and I used the bathroom, and then I came out. They were still standing there, and I asked somebody there, I said, what are you guys all standing around here for? And they said, because they told us to. They told us not to leave, to just stand here and wait. And I said, well, what are you waiting for? And they said, I don't know, but we were just told to stand here and wait. And it was like they were all under some mind control or something. And so anyway, I said, well, I can't stand and wait with you. I've got to go. And so I turned around and I started to leave, and a guy came up to me and stopped me. And he said, you can't leave. He says, you have to stand in the line with all the others like you were told. And I said, no. I said, I got to go and get the gurney thing out of the dolly out of the van for the guitarist so he can load all the equipment on there. And I said, I have to go. I got to go now. And he said, no, you can't leave. And I said, look, I've got to go. And he said, well, come with me. He says, I'll see if they can take you now. And he took me ahead of all these people that were lined up. He took me outside. There was a set of doors there across from the hallway. And he took me outside, and there was snow all over the ground. And I noticed all these footprints, like people had been walking this same route. All these footprints were in the snow. And so we were following this trail of footprints. And at that point, when we came around the corner, there was a large saucer-shaped craft again. It was sitting on the ground behind the university, kind of hidden by this wall. So anyway, this guy took me up to the doorway, and there was a woman standing in the doorway. And he said, can you take this guy now? And she said, no. She said, we got way too many as it is. We're overcrowded. And she said, you'll have to go and wait like everybody else. And I said, I can't wait. And he said, he can't wait. He's got to go now. And she said, well, I can't take him now. So he said, well, what do you want me to do then? And she said, well, where has he got to go? Take him where he has to go and come back. So he took me down the road toward the pub, the Brock pub. And as we were walking there, I looked at him, and he was starting to look more and more like a gray as I was looking at him. Then I said, these guys are going to wonder where the heck I got to, because they sent me to get the dolly for the equipment, and I've been gone a long time. And I said, I don't know what they're going to be mad when they see me. They're going to give me hell. And So anyway, as we were going down the road, I could see the van there, and the doors were open on it, and they were piling the equipment in. And so anyway, I said, there they are. I said, can you come with me and explain why I'm late getting back? And he said, no, I can't do that. He says, I have to go back. They need me. And I said, well, can you at least stand over by the fence there, and so I can point to you and say, there's the guy that held me up. That's the reason why I'm late getting back. And he said, okay, I'll stand there for a minute or so. And then he says, so then I've got to go. So I walked up to him, and they called me Boucher. That was my nickname. And they said, Boucher, where the hell were you? He said, we've been looking all over for you. And Sam said, it's a good thing Tom had another set of keys to get into the van. Otherwise, we would have been in a real mess, you know. But he had a hidden key case with an extra key. So anyway, I pointed to this guy over by the fence, and I said, I was with that guy there. And they said, what guy? And I could see him plain as day. And I said, that guy, the guy standing there beside the fence. And they said, there's nobody there. And I said, there is. I said, can't you see him? And they couldn't see him. And so anyway, then we got into the van, and everybody was mad at me. They thought that I had done something really stupid, and they were all mad at me. They wouldn't talk to me. And so anyway, I ended up going home. But I've skipped a couple of parts, because when we first came into the university, I could see way down at the end of the hall where we were going. There's a set of doors there that lead out to the pub, and we were headed down that way, and I could see these grays, a couple of grays walking around. And when they saw us coming, the one opened one of the doors of a classroom and walked into it, and the door closed, and the other one went around the corner. So when we got there, I said to them, I'm going to open the door of that classroom and take a look in there and see if I can see this guy. As I pointed them out, I said, look, those beings aren't human. And they just kind of passed it off. They didn't really say much about it. And so when I got up there, I opened the door of the classroom, and it was pitch black in there. I couldn't see anything. And I wasn't going to go in to find out, so I closed the door. As soon as I went around the corner, there was 3 of them, and they grabbed us right away and separated us from each other. And I noticed that one of them, there was like a concession stand that usually it's closed, but the door of the concession stand was up, and the light was on, and there was a gray being standing behind it, behind the counter on it. And I saw that, but then this one being took me aside, and they took Anne-Marie aside, and they had her against this window, and they had us all separated, and they were trying to find out what we were doing there and where we were going. And we told them that we're the band that's playing in this pub, and we have to get there because they're expecting us, and we're being paid for it. We have to work. And so then they said they're going to be missed, so we have to let them go. And so they told us all that to go out the door, and as soon as we go out the door, we're going to immediately forget. And sure enough, as soon as we got out that door, we all forgot. We walked over to the pub, and there's this stairway outside the pub. It's like a stairwell, sort of, but an external one, and we have to go up the stairs to get to the pub. So we went up the stairs, and we were banging on the pub door, and nobody was answering. And we were standing outside, and it was cold, and I just happened to glance over the railing, and I see one of the beings moving below on the ground, moving toward the road where the ship was parked. And when I saw him, I brought it to Anne Marie's attention. I said, "Look," I said, "there's a being, an alien down there." And she looked and she said, "Oh yeah," she says, and the other guys were saying, "What are you talking about?" And she says, there was a guy down there, an alien. And anyway, he just disappeared. And so we didn't think anything more of it after that. And then finally the guy came and opened the pub and let us in. So that's the whole story of what happened there. I've always Well, the bass player has disappeared, and somebody told me that he died. But the drummer is still around, and the guitarist is still around. The drummer doesn't play drums anymore. The guitarist is still playing, but I can't reveal their names because I don't want to get them involved in this, because they don't want to remember, you know. Well, when Q-Foreign investigated the case, they managed to talk the guitarist into undergoing a hypnosis session to find out what he remembered. But during the session, he didn't. They couldn't get him to remember that spot. Like he didn't want to remember. He was blocking it, you know. But Anne Marie, who was the drummer's girlfriend, later married the guitarist. She became his wife, and so she was there when he had the hypnosis session, and she remembered some parts of it. She remembered me saying, "Did you see that?" and pointing at the window, and she remembered that part. So the guitarist, either he couldn't be put under hypnosis or he didn't want to remember, but it was unproductive. The drummer didn't want anything to do with it. He was very resistant. He was always resistant to the whole thing. He wouldn't cooperate with them when they tried to get him to take his clothes off. And so, you know, he didn't want anything to do with it.
Why do you think? What do you think your help is about? The sort of the thing you're going to help people. Have you been able to sort that out? What that might mean?
Not really. I've read a lot of Dolores Cannon's books since then, and I found out that a lot of people have incarnated at this particular time that have come from all different planets and different places out in space. And a lot of them have been given missions before they came here. They were like soul contracts, and they were born already having this mission. But I wasn't given a mission before I came here. And that's why they gave it to me during the incident with the band. And I found out the reason for that because just last month I underwent another hypnosis session. And it was a QHHT session, a quantum healing hypnosis technique. And it was done at many mansions in Hamilton by a lady named Audra. And she has a business. You can find it on Facebook, called One Soul Awakening. And she did this session on me, and during the session I found out that I'd been tricked into coming here. I wasn't supposed to come here. It wasn't what was originally intended to be. My journey was supposed to be something else. I wasn't supposed to come to Earth, but I got tricked into it and conned into it. And once you agree, you're in, you know. If I had stood my ground with that being named Rigel and said, no, I'm not going, and that's all there is to it, then they can't force you to do that. You have to agree to it. It has to be your will. Even if it isn't your will, if you agree, it's considered to be your will. And they tricked me into it. So I found out during that session that since I was already here and I had come in without a mission, they figured, well, most people are on Earth now to achieve this particular mission where they're supposed to help people ascend, or, you know, to help mankind. So I believe that's what the mission was that they gave me during the van incident.
Okay, you and I have discussed this environmental thing, and I mentioned the people on the ship seeing the screen, and I think you mentioned the fact that you've seen it. This environmental message was given to you in dreams. Is that true? And maybe you can talk about your dreams. Have you gotten anything through dreams? Are they interacting with you through your dreams?
I have had dreams involving aliens and UFOs. I don't know if they're relevant to whatever this mission was that they gave me, but I have had dreams involving ships. When I've looked up in the sky in my dream and I've seen ships up there, and there was one dream I had where I was on some other planet and I was talking to one of these beings. So I have had dreams involving them, but I'm still unclear about what the mission is. I think that it's basically the same mission as everybody else that incarnated here, to help mankind, to help people ascend, to awaken them, you know, that kind of thing. Because that certainly seems to be the area that I'm headed. It's where my biggest interest lies.
And the environmental thing, you wrote a song in the 1970s. It was never published, but you did write one on some sort of environmental message in the 70s, right?
Did, yeah. And back then I read a book by Immanuel Velikovsky called Worlds in Collision. And I guess I found it really interesting. It resonated with me. And I think part of that had sort of triggered portions of the memory of what my mission is. I don't know. But it got me interested in this stuff. And I've always kind of felt that, you know, that man is destroying the earth, that they've messed everything up, and I've always been kind of a light worker, if you want to call it that. I don't know. Even when I was a teenager, you know, threw something on the ground, I'd pick it up, put it in the garbage can, and scold them for it, you know, because I was always kind of for the environment and interested in that.
Beautiful. Okay, I know you got another interview coming up, so I'm going to give you the last question, which is, oh, here comes somebody with a question. Somebody's running up with a question here. Let me do this one, and then I'm going to give you the last question. Did he ever find out about what religion is not found on Earth? Did you ever get any resolution about the religion question that you were asking in your subsequent regressions?
Not really, but what happened was there's a friend of mine, a lady friend that goes to events with me and stuff, and she's a Christian. And so she said to me, after I told her about my story, and she said, well, if they told you that, why on earth would you ever leave Christianity? And I said, well, because I felt that I've outgrown it. And I don't think they ever expected me to get this far. So,
wow.
Yeah. But I learned... go ahead.
Yeah. You gave the musical instrument to this alien. Do you have any recollection of seeing him after that? Or how do you know it ended in '76?
Because that was when the last abduction occurred that I remember. And as far as I know, none have occurred after that. But there could still be some in my subconscious that just hasn't surfaced yet. But they happened with different people. I had a couple of incidents happened with my dad. Another incident happened with my first wife when I was dating her. And so there are other people that have been involved. I wish there were people that could substantiate my story. That's the thing I regret the most, is that, you know, the guys in the band don't want anything to do with it. They don't want to take it any further. They just don't want to talk about it.
Well, I'm going to do what I can to make sure your story very public, that the message gets out. And I'll back up, because I've heard you tell the story a number of times, and plus the article sort of verifies that the same story is being told. One question just sort of popped into my mind that I always like to ask experiencers. You met with this alien before you were born. You met with him a number of times. And I always want to ask experiencers, did the alien ever get any older, or did he always look the same?
You know, when I try to imagine him, I have trouble imagining what he looks like. I've seen brief flashes of memory about his face. Like, I remember his face in the van when he came into the van, and his eyes weren't completely black when he came in the van. They looked more like human eyes, but a lot bigger. And he had large pupils. I believe they were blue. And there were some whites of his eyes around the pupil. So I think from what I've learned from studying them, the black eyes are actually some kind of like a contact lens that keeps their eyes protected from the light, because our light is too bright for them. So they don't need the contacts. They take them off, or they disappear, or something, you know.
Once again, I really appreciate your doing this for us. Fascinating story. My final question for you, and then you can go get ready for your other interview. Looking back, you've had years and years to think about this, and you've done a lot of reading in ufology. You've seen the good versus the bad alien, all this sort of stuff. So the question is, if you had to do it over, would you do it again? And what message would you have for the group here in Winnipeg? You're talking to maybe 35 people here, who, and a lot of them are experiencers. They've been down sort of a road, not maybe as dramatic as yours, but they've got experiences. So what message would you have for them, and is this good or bad? How do you sum this whole?
Well, there were two questions there. What was the first one again?
Well, is it a good or a bad thing,
Okay.
looking at it through your whole lifetime? And what's the ultimate message? You've got a chance to give this message to a whole group of people in another city. What's the main message you want to leave that you think this all means? What's this all about?
In regard to whether it's a good or a bad thing, they treated me fine. They never hurt me or did anything to scare me. They made me feel at ease. They were actually polite. When the one being put that thing on my arm, he answered my questions, and he didn't have to show me how it worked beforehand, but he did that to alleviate any fear I might have of it. And so I think when people claim they have bad experiences, I think it's more a perception based on what they believe than the actual incident itself. Like two of the ladies I met in New York that Bud Hopkins introduced me to, the one girl said when she was a little girl she was playing with them. She thought they were elves, And then I met this guy there. The guy had a completely different story. He said it scared him so bad that when they found him, he was walking along this road, a dirt road. His clothes were all buttoned wrong. He'd peed himself, and he was just mumbling stuff, and the police picked him up. And he was talking crazy. And he was completely terrified. He said, I'd never want to have anything like that happen to me again. But myself and these girls, like we found it to be, our experiences to be positive. And yes, I would do it again. If I had the opportunity, more questions I'd like to ask them. And I have a lot more experience now, having read many of the cases of other abductees, and so I know how to behave when I'm with them if they give me the chance, But I don't know if I'll ever get that opportunity again. I'm getting up in years now, and maybe I wouldn't be as useful to them as I was when I was younger. I don't know. Then as a parting message, I would say if you've had experiences and you're worried about learning about them or finding out what happened, worried about maybe going under hypnosis, I would strongly recommend that you do it, because it totally changed my life. Once I learned all this stuff, it completely changed my life. And I'm very happy that I found out all this stuff, because if I hadn't have gone under hypnosis, all this stuff could have remained buried in my mind for years, and I might never know what happened. So if you're apprehensive about having hypnosis done, I would highly recommend that you do it, because sometimes things like that, if they're buried in your subconscious, it can cause you to have irrational fears of things that you don't understand. And once it comes out, those fears disappear. Like I used to have a really bad fear of the dark when I was younger. I was terrified of the dark. I always slept with a nightlight on and stuff like that. After I recalled all these experiences, I just lost my fear of the dark. Now I sleep in almost pitch darkness, just whatever light comes in through the window. So there are good things that can come from it.
Okay. Now, I said that was the last question. I lied. In every group, you have people who aren't well. You underwent this quantum healing. Do you think this helped you? Do you think this is a valid thing for somebody who has some problem, health problem, life-threatening problem?
Yes, it's a technique that was developed by Dolores Cannon, and there's 3 parts to the session. The first one is when she puts you under, she would have you recall a previous lifetime, and she leaves it totally open to you to choose whatever lifetime you want to experience. Then after that session, then the second part is where she contacts the subconscious directly, and the conscious mind steps aside. And once she contacts the subconscious directly, she'll ask it, why did you show this person that particular incarnation? What do you want them to learn from that? And so then the subconscious will explain why you had that particular incarnation, why you remembered that particular one. And then the third part of it is the healing part, where she'll ask the subconscious to scan the person's body for health issues or defects or problems, and a lot of times they'll find problems and they'll heal them right there on the spot, like you know, and they can heal almost anything, you know, any disease or whatever. But some particular ones that they won't heal are because you've agreed to have that illness before you were born. There's a reason why you chose to experience that, whether it be to pay off karma or usually that's what it is, or there's many times where it's a pain in the shoulder, could be like from a previous lifetime where you were had a soldier and you got bayoneted in the shoulder or something like that. There's reasons why. And her daughter Julia Cannon has written a book called Soul Speak, and it goes into a lot of depth about why people experience certain illnesses and problems, health problems, and what they mean, because your body's actually trying to explain something. Your subconscious is trying to give you a message through that injury or illness. And I found it's a very good book to use as a reference book. But anyway, that's about it.
Steve, I really appreciate it. I didn't realize you had the second part of the story. Anything I can do for you at any point, if you need my help, I'm here. I just really appreciate you coming here, and I'm sure the people just loved it. And I'm going to do whatever I can to make sure that as many people as possible hear your story. I think it's very important, and it has messages for everybody. So thanks a lot for coming, and we'll let you get to your next interview.
Okay, good night. Take care.
Good night. Thanks.